So I managed to bounce back today with a win in round 9 of the Gibraltar Masters tournament. It was a pretty decent game. I messed up the opening actually a little bit, but very quickly reached a really comfortable position and kind of just took control from there. So I was playing FIDE Master Andres Aguilar, and he's mostly an English player with white, typically starting with 1c4 these days, but he also plays some knight f3, knight f6, c4, as took place in this game. Um, I went for King's Indian type setup, castles, castles, d6, and here's where white can really choose between, I think, two main ways. They can go for d4 and play the fianchetto King's Indian kind of main line, or they can eventually just put the pawn on d3 and do something like knight c3, and we get more of a typical English type of middle game here. In this game, he went for d4. I think he's played both options, but against the King's Indian, he seems to be familiar with the fianchetto stuff. And this wasn't too unexpected. This was one of the lines I prepared. And so I was actually quite happy to try it out over the board. Knight c6, knight c3, and e5. And I actually recently had this at my previous tournament, the Bay Area International, against Rochelle Wu. So if you want to see how that game played out, I'll maybe include a link in the description below. But in that game, white pushed d5, I played knight b8, and we played this kind of middle game, which was quite an interesting one. In this game, he goes for d takes e5, which I think has become pretty much the main line these days. This is Avrick's recommendation as well in his book, and yeah, I think this is where most top players are looking for the advantage. So our game was theoretically quite interesting. I played d takes e5, bishop g5, bishop e6. This is all mainline stuff. Now if white goes for this endgame, I forgot which rook black is supposed to take with. Probably rook f is fine. This endgame I think is totally okay for black. White can, let's say, take on f6, but black just recaptures and there's no knight d5, and yeah, basically black is doing fine here. So white mainly looks for an advantage with one of two moves, either queen a4 as played in the game, or queen c1 is also popular. And in this game, queen a4 was played, and there was two other games in the tournament, actually, at least two that I know of, featured in this line. So if this is something you're interested in, you should also check out the games between Alejandro Ramirez and Li Quangliem. Played this earlier, and Humpy Canero versus David Howell also featured this line. So this is a very trendy position, and I think all three games, including mine, went queen a4 and queen c8. So yeah, lately this line has just been very popular for both sides, and yeah, it was nice to join the discussion, so to speak. Okay, so now white played knight to d2. I think this is quite a logical move, opening up the bishop and threatening bishop takes c6. I think other moves here are rook fd1, and sometimes white just takes on f6 right away. I think this is how Humpy Canero played it. Takes knight d5, and Howell played bishop d8 here. And this is kind of the way the line often develops. Like, white seemingly gets this initiative, but black gets the two bishops and a lot of long-term potential. And if black is able to push white back, and then a lot of times black overtakes the initiative. And actually black won both games that I mentioned, so this is quite a dynamic line. Okay, knight d2, and here I play bishop d7. I was still following my prep, so I knew this was kind of the move, just defending the knight. And here white goes for bishop takes f6, which I think is one of the only ways white can really fight for an advantage here. So bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and knight de4. So yeah, so here's where I got my prep a little bit mixed up. I think the main line, according to my file, is to play knight d5. And bishop g7 is possible, but it allows this pretty common trick, queen takes c6. Bishop takes c6, knight e7 check, king h8, white wins back the queen. But white is also able to trade off black's pair of bishops and spoil the queenside pawn structure. So something like this, I think, would be considered very, very unpleasant for black. White just gets like a very comfortable end game, and I'm not sure if white will play like e4 or not, just to try and block the bishop, or maybe knight e4, knight c5, or even b3. But yeah, in any case, black structure long term is really weak. So I mean, that endgame is playable, but for sure black is worse there. Instead, my line goes bishop d8, keeping e7 protected, so there's no queen takes e6 tricks. Then after something like knight e4, f5, knight c5, bishop e8. I think I analyzed a little bit further in my notes, but this is basically where the game kind of starts. Black puts all his pieces on the back rank, but the next idea is to play b6 and start kicking away white's knight. So if black is able to push everything back, eventually the two bishops, they come out to like f7 and f6, and black pushes e4, and the position just springs to full life. So it's again a really interesting line to play. Okay, so that was kind of the line I had remembered over the board, but here he played knight de4, so he starts with this knight, and thinking this was still following my prep, I just played bishop d8, kind of expecting knight d5, f5, knight c5, bishop e8, and we kind of transpose to my prep, and yeah, I want to play b6 next move, and the engine says it's something about equal here, but it's a very strange equality. It's kind of like a dynamic equality, not like the position is symmetrical or anything like that. But yeah, against this move, bishop d8, actually analyzing after the game, I think it's a little bit dubious. And my file had the right move, bishop g7. So here the bishop can come back because there's no threat of queen takes c6. And the bishop is better placed on g7. During the game, I was wondering why black can't play this move, and I ended up going bishop d8 simply because I just thought like that's what I remember that move in my preparation, and it was a little sloppy to just go for it based on that alone, because I couldn't figure out why bishop g7 would be bad either, and it turns out it's probably the best move in the position. So after knight c5, let's say bishop e8. Rook f d1, king h8 I think is a nice move, just kind of getting out of the way of any bishop d5 check ideas, and eventually black wants to play like f5 and e4 and shut white's bishop out of the game, and again play b6. I mean, it's a very, very concrete position, but yeah, this is definitely what I should have done. So after bishop d8, he plays knight c5, bishop e8, and now white doesn't have to play knight d5. So this would actually transpose to my prep, except if I play f5. So this is kind of an important point. So f5 transposes, but afterwards I figured out that, with Stockfish help of course, that okay, black doesn't have to play f5 here based on this move order. Here white's knight is not on e4, so there's no knight f6 check, and black instead has this move knight d4. So I can finally use this discovered attack. Earlier, this move knight d4 never really leads to much, and then after queen d1, c6, this is kind of the whole point of black's play. This knight on d5 now has to go back, and black is going to get bishop e7, and suddenly all of white's pieces are going to be pushed backwards. So yeah, I think white had another option here. It turns out queen a3 is quite strong here. Like, what a random move, right? Okay, it makes some sense. It gets out of the way of the discovered attack. It defends the knight, maybe x-rays the rook on f8 in some lines. But it's a hard move to make because from white's point of view, you're like taking a step backwards and you're also walking into like bishop e7, which just looks like a very unpleasant move to walk into. Like, why would you pin yourself like this? But after knight d5, bishop d6, apparently white has this move b4, and everything is great and the tactics are working out. For example, f5 might be a logical move. White has this idea to play knight takes b7, queen takes b7, and c5. And the bishop can't go back to e7. This is kind of the only safe square because of knight takes e7 check. So white is winning the piece back and is probably going to have a better position after that. So yeah, this queen a3 move, it's like very, unnatural to play, and my opponent spent some time here, and it's not surprising he didn't come up with it, because it's just, even if you see the move, it's one thing to see it, it's another thing to even evaluate it correctly. Like, you have to see so many of these lines. So I think that's one of the more interesting things about this variation today, is like, a lot of times if you turn on the engine and you start preparing some of the lines, it looks scary because white has these like active possibilities, but over the board, if you're not exactly like aware of concretely move by move like what white is supposed to do, it's very difficult to figure it out, even for very strong players. And so they end up making one inaccurate move, and all of a sudden like black gets the upper hand. So it's very like double-edged in every sense of the word. Like if like two engines are playing, then it seems like white is just going to have great chances here. But if it's human versus human, then in practical play, I think black starts getting the upper hand. So after some thought, he played e3 here, and now I knew, okay, for sure I'm out of book, because I haven't seen this move e3 in any of my lines. And I figure it's probably not critical, again, based just on the character of the position. If white doesn't make use of the lead in development somehow, then black is able to strike back. So I played bishop e7. And then the engine points out queen b5 as the only move that white can play to kind of keep fighting for the advantage. Rook b8, knight d5, something like this. Bishop d8, and then like queen b3, probably just to get out of the way again. And then I think white is doing all right. But he went back knight 5 e4, which, okay, seems reasonable, but then after f5, all of a sudden black is now just taking over the position. And already black is getting a big advantage. So white made basically like one or two inaccuracies, and that's it. Black is already taking over. So now the point is, if the knight just simply has to retreat. So this bishop first on d8, now on e7 was always just kind of dominating these knights on d5, e4. If the knight goes back to d2, then I'll push e4 and I shut the bishop out. I also introduced the idea of playing like knight e5 and regrouping with bishop f7 and bishop f6. So now the position resembles like a very nice Leningrad Dutch, where black has gotten this f5 e4, and this is actually a pretty typical construction that is very good against this bishop on g2. It's just really neutralizing it and giving black a ton more space in the position. So I was quite confident already here that black is getting a big advantage. Okay, after f5, he actually played this tricky move, knight d5. And at first I thought this was a total blunder, because, okay, the idea is f takes e4, he wants to play queen takes c6, I have bishop d6. And I thought he just missed this and his queen is trapped and game over. But then I realized he has queen takes d6, and I was like, oh no, not so easy. Takes, knight e7 check, he wins back all of his material, and then is actually going to be better in the endgame because he has a kind of much healthier pawn structure. Next is like rook d1 and hitting my d6 pawn. So yeah, after some thought, I realized f takes e4. His trick is definitely working with queen takes c6. Black has some other options there, but white always has a way out. Like I was thinking about bishop d8, but then simply queen c5, and the e4 pawn is hanging, and white has knight e7 checking the position. So here I think black's position is way too loose. Like with all the pieces on the back rank, it's really tough, even the bishops. But okay, it's not a big deal. After knight d5, I just pull back one more time, bishop d8. And now if he goes knight c5, I was trying to figure out how this compares to my prep, but apparently it's exactly my prep, and white made this move e3, which is definitely not going to be the most active move in the position. I think my file continues like queen a3 or queen d1, something like that. And for whatever reason, I'm probably just getting out of the discovered attack again. And the position is about equal, but to me it feels already kind of easier for black to play because white is the one that has to kind of keep proving something. So I thought for a while, and I ended up playing b6 here. I maybe should have gone for e4. This was kind of, I think, objectively a better move. I was pretty sure he would play knight f4 here, although I'm not sure, maybe rook a d1 could have happened or something else. But then after g5, we're getting something that's pretty similar to the game, except I've cut out one of his options. So I think this would be quite good for black. After b6, he played knight d3, and then I pushed e4, and as you can see, we're going to get a very similar type of structure. But he did have this additional option to play knight e6. And yeah, it's actually kind of a funny moment here. So I spent a lot of time calculating this because, okay, queen takes e6, then he has some, let's say, discovery with the knight, right? Knight moves away and bishop shows up on d5. So I was looking at knight takes b6 first, but then I realized a takes b6 and bishop d5 is just not working. I can take on a4, or taking on d5 is probably even better, and I'm winning the queen back. And then if he takes the rook on a8, then I'm in time with this move e4. Defending the knight, shutting off the bishop, and now I have two pieces for the rook, but I think it's a very nice middle game for black, because the knight will come to e5, and the bishops will come out, and it's just, looks like black has a pretty serious edge there. But then I realized he has knight takes c7, which is stronger. And if bishop takes c7, bishop d5 is coming, and that's kind of the main line. I don't have any other options because if the queen moves anywhere, he's just going to take the bishop on e8 and then grab this knight. So bishop takes c7 would be forced, bishop d5, and then I was trying to figure out what kind of endgame this would be with three pieces versus the queen, something like knight e7. And I thought black should be doing all right here, at least reasonably well, because I'm want to get bishop d6 in, and then rook d8 and bishop f7, and you know, typically speaking, if three pieces are kind of coordinated and defending each other, they're gonna outplay the queen. But it's not always so easy. A lot of times it just depends on the concrete details in the position. Like for instance here, like a7 pawn is hanging and has to be defended. Objectively, the engine was giving queen a3 here, and says actually white has enough counterplay to draw, or to equalize the position. Yeah, actually black is not forced to play queen takes d5. During the game, I kind of thought this was forced, but I have another move here, knight d4, which is quite nice. Then after, let's say, bishop takes e6, knight takes e6, white isn't getting this strong pawn on d5, instead the pawn is stuck on c4, and here black is kind of in control of the position, and it's like -1, so quite a decent advantage, but still a complicated position to convert for sure. Then after the game, my opponent told me he didn't go for this, because after knight e6, he didn't think queen takes e6 was forced, he thought black had knight d4. And then, I mean, we were just discussing in the hallway, so we were kind of visualizing the position ourselves, and I immediately realized, oh yeah, knight d4, why didn't I think of this? Just like hitting the queen, knight on e6 is lost, and white is just winning, or black is winning a piece. It looks like game over, right? So yeah, I felt a little silly for missing this. Then checking it afterwards, it turns out white has this move, knight takes d8. And yeah, it's working for white, because if I take on a4, he's going to have knight e7 check, and he's winning the queen, and I'm actually not sure what the material count is going to be, but for the moment, white is up a piece. It seems like black should probably take, maybe take, and then minimum white can take on e5 and is doing quite all right. So yeah, that's working for white, and then if queen takes d8, I think probably his queen just moves away and material stays equal, and I think white is doing quite well here. Actually, knight takes c7 might be coming next, followed by bishop takes a8. So yeah, actually knight e6, knight d4 is working for white after knight takes d8, so I would have to actually take on e6, and after knight c7 we would get this really interesting position with 3 pieces versus the queen. So this is why this move b6, kind of a long explanation, is kind of dubious, is that knight e6 was definitely white's best option at this point, and it would have imbalanced the game quite a bit. And that's why I should have started with e4 and just cut off these options right away, and then play b6 in the future. Which, yeah, would have been just more practical anyway. In any case, after b6, he played knight d3, I played e4, knight f4, and g5. And I'm not really doing this, just to attack the knight, but rather I'm just taking away this square from his knight and forcing him back to the passive square e2. Then I play knight e5. Now his queen is forced to go back, and c6. So it was very, very satisfying, as you can imagine, to get this move in. Because all of a sudden it's like move 23, and compare the position to back here where like all my pieces were on the back rank. It feels really nice to like immediately like prove the concept, like push everything back. And now I was quite confident that black just had a huge advantage here. And the engine confirms it. It's already quite serious. I mean, -2 is a bit strong, but that's Stockfish's evaluation. Well, the problem is all of white's pieces are just very, very bad. Only potential is this knight can come to d4, but even then, eventually I might even play like a6 to cover the b5 square and then c5 to push the knight back. But that didn't end up being necessary. So, okay, the c4 pawn I didn't really want to take and allow knight takes c4, and then I would lose my grip over the position. Instead, I found a very nice plan here, starting with queen e6. So I'm hitting the pawn, he plays b3, and queen h6. And I decided it's time just to go for the kingside attack. I would like to play either knight g4 next or knight f3 check. And yeah, if he allows me to do this or has to take e takes f3, it's just extremely dangerous for the king, and probably just objectively white is getting mated. The pawn will go to g4, and I'll put my bishop on c7, so if his knight ever shows up on f4, I can take it off and play queen h3 and give mate. A ton of arrows, but yeah, it all checks out. So he plays h3. I think this was the best move, just to give his king some breathing room. Like now, knight f3 check, he's no longer forced to take. He can play king h1, and here I think I didn't go for this, but it was quite good just to play bishop h5 and then next move bishop g4, and yeah, white will have to do something like knight g1, and black is probably at least winning a pawn there after taking and then taking on h3. So okay, instead I just went for the immediate bishop h5. I realized I didn't have to rush here. I can just put my pieces on good squares, and he doesn't have any counterplay, so I can really take my time. Yeah, he doesn't have a whole lot to do. Already I was thinking about, like, if knight d4, I would probably plop in with knight f3 check, and let's say knight takes f3, e takes f3, bishop h1. I'll actually no longer even be playing for the attack here. I think I'll just play g4 just to lock in his bishop. And strategically, this position seems like it's going to be losing for white. Next, I'll play bishop f6, queen g7, and I'll even just try to trade everything off and just put my rooks in the center. And yeah, any endgame where white is left with his bishop on h1, I think is just going to be hopeless, because strategically, there's no way for the bishop to break out. Maybe some random e4 breaks, but it will always cost a lot of material for white, and yeah, it seems quite bad. So I was looking to mate him, of course, but I also wouldn't mind positionally, like, crushing situation either. After knight f3, there's another nice line here. Bishop takes f3, takes. Queen d1 I figured was kind of the only move, because white has to attack this f3 pawn. G4, h4. I have this nice winning idea with bishop takes h4. And after g takes h4, actually I could take here. I was thinking queen d6 would be the only defense, but then I have f4 sealing everything off, and black is just giving mate in this position. White has no defense. No perpetual check, because queen e6, rook f7, and that's it. But actually, even simpler, other than taking on h4, I realized is I could just play rook a d8, which is a nice in-between move. Queen has to move, and then queen takes h4, and white is just completely busted. So, yeah, already I was looking forward to some of these lines. Instead, white played rook fd1, which is probably, again, the best chance to give his king a square on f1. I played bishop c7, king f1, and rook f7. I think I handled this part of the game quite well. He was actually in pretty heavy time trouble. I had some time left, like maybe 20-25 minutes. So not a whole lot of time, but I realized that I don't have to rush. I should just continue to improve my pieces, and then eventually, the right breakthrough will come. Especially since he still doesn't have any active moves, so I'm very much in control. So he plays rook d4. And by the way, the point of rook f7 is I want to either double rooks on the f-file, or potentially in some line swing this rook to the g-file when I push f4 and the g-file opens up. So rook d4 was played. I jump in with knight f3. Now taking would be just too dangerous because my light square bishop is way too strong. So he goes back, rook d1. I bring in the second rook with rook e8. a4, he has nothing else to do. Here already I could have just broken through with f4. I'm not sure why. Okay, I thought this would happen, takes, and then I can take on f4 here. I also saw I could just play e3 takes, rook takes e3. It was kind of weird. I mean, it's like, I was thinking about this position, and I didn't really see, what my threat is, right? Because, knight h2 check is never really leading to anywhere. And then if I play, bishop takes f4, maybe he just ignores it. But, yeah, I mean, it's kind of silly, looking at the position now, and then knowing that Stockfish thinks it's, minus 14 or something, ridiculous. But, yeah, black should just take on f4, and then pull the bishop back, and white's king on f1 is just going to be toast on the f-file. So, yeah, this would have been just very, very simple. Instead, I play bishop g6. I'm kind of preparing the breakthrough, lining the bishop up against white's queen. He pushes a5. Now I figured, okay, it's time for f4. A takes b6, a takes b6, takes on f4, takes on f4, ef4, and bishop f5. Bishop takes f4 was certainly possible as well. I don't think he would take on f4, but if he does, queen takes f4, then I can maybe come in with queen h2, or e3 is coming next as well, so it's, yeah, really just a mess for white. Black's pieces are totally dominating. Instead, I play this move bishop f5, which I thought was also a good winning idea. I just want to take the h3 pawn now, trade off his bishop for my bishop, and then leave myself with this awesome knight on f3 and use my queen and rooks to try and checkmate him. And I figured it should be over, but actually now at this point I was spending some time in under 10 minutes here with about five or six moves to make to the time control. And actually I had to rely on my calculation in a bit, and thankfully it didn't let me down. Okay, so he plays knight g3. I figured this was kind of the only try. Bishop takes h3. Knight takes e4. He grabs this pawn. Rook takes f4. Yeah, initially I was expecting I was going to take on g2, but I realized rook takes f4 is better just because I can keep all my options open. And I think this is better, because if he takes, I just come in with check. So he goes rook a7. And here's where I had to do some calculation here, because it's move 37, so a few moves from the time control. I'm down to just a couple minutes here. I play bishop takes g2, king takes g2, queen h2 check, king f1. And this is really the critical moment, because black has to kind of commit to a check here. This is move 39, so I have to make two more moves. And my options are queen h3 check and queen g1 check. And okay, both of these moves probably win, but in my opinion, one of them is cleaner and stronger, and I ended up finding the right one. So I'll give you guys some time here to pause the video. I think it's a good exercise because, at first glance, the position looks absolutely crushing, and black is probably winning in a number of different ways here. But with the clock ticking, you have 4 minutes on your clock, and you have to calculate lines. It's not always easy to calculate accurately, but yeah, thankfully I was able to get the job done. Okay, so the line I kind of figured out was queen g1 check, king e2 is forced, and then knight d4 check, very important move. So the main idea is that if rook takes d4, then one of my pieces is going to be able to take on f2 with check because the knight on e4 is pinned, and that's just going to be decisive. But the line I really wasn't sure about was what happens if after knight d4 check, white's king goes to d3. Because if I take on c2, my queen on g1 is also hanging. So this is the line that started causing me to panic a little bit, and I wanted to make sure I really calculated it accurately. If you'd like to test your visualization, I'd encourage you to try that. Like, try to visualize the moves queen g1 check, king e2, knight d4 check, king d3, and then try to find black's strongest continuation from there. Okay, so I ended up finding it, and so I went for queen g1 check, king e2, and then here I double checked my calculation, making sure I want to stick with knight d4 check, because okay, maybe I could also play a different move here. Although at this point I realized I was kind of committed because my bishop on c7 is hanging. And yeah, knight d4 check was played. So if rook takes d4, like I mentioned, black can take on f2 with either piece. I think rook takes f2 is stronger. After king d3, there's rook f3 check, and this is just leading to a pretty quick mate. King d2, bishop f4. I didn't see like all the way to the mate here. I just saw that rook takes f2 is crushing, and minimum I can take the queen. But I also saw that after rook takes d4, queen takes f2 might be just totally winning as well, because king d1, I can take on d4 with check, and then black is just in control and taking too much material. Actually, it doesn't look all that clear, but the problem is at the end of the line, white's king on c1 is still in huge danger. So like rook takes c7, rook c1 check, and it's mate in a couple moves. So yeah, I knew that, okay, rook takes d4, both of these two moves are basically winning. But yeah, after king d3, I think the key point is that now black has rook f3 check. So this was the moment where knight takes c2, rook takes g1, not so clear, but rook f3 check, this is a nice point. King d2 actually runs into bishop f4. I didn't see that this was mate in one during the game. Oddly enough, it's not the most obvious mate. My idea was actually just to take on f2. Then knight takes f2, queen takes, and I'm going to win the queen next move. Or if the king continues to move, then now when the king steps to the c-file, I'm taking the queen with check, and so this is just game over. And black is probably giving mate very soon anyway. So rook f3 check, this was the key move, and the main point after king takes d4, not rook d8, knight d6, okay, that should be winning for black, but bishop e5 is a very, very nice mate in one. So that's how the game ended. It was a pretty sweet finish with white's king on d4, and I have to thank my opponent for being a good sport and letting it show up on the board. And yeah, I mean, overall it was quite an interesting game. I definitely flubbed the opening a little bit by putting my bishop on the wrong square. But yeah, that's the danger when you prepare these sharp lines and you don't know like really exactly move by move. You know, sometimes you might make a mistake and not realize when your opponent has deviated from the line. But okay, other than that, it was a pretty solid game. I feel like I did some good calculation and I played the position well. I'm now on 5 out of 9 going into the last round tomorrow, which will be a morning round, so I'll have to rest up and get prepared for that. Okay, one more round to go. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate everyone tuning in and watching these videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.